And now, Move the Sticks with Daniel, Jeremiah, and Bucky Brooks.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Move the Sticks. DJ and Buck with you. Buck, man, we are inside 3 weeks, and this thing will finally be here. I feel like this gets like slower and slower. I feel like the sprint to get to the combine gets shorter and shorter, and I feel like then from then to the draft, I feel like it feels so long, man.
Yeah, and it's interesting in terms of like how to occupy your time, right? So you've already gone through, like you talk about your 150. I talk about my top fives, but I try to get to 150 in terms of doing all the other stuff like ranking and banking. But then you're like, I need to go back and look at the guys that I looked at earlier, the ones that I feel strongly about. I still need to look at and make sure that like what I'm saying matches with what I really feel about them. And so like last week when they had the conversation about like Ty Simpson or some of the other guys, like just going back and you look at stuff and you're like, I said about the fall off at the end of the year, but that's not all the way accurate when you go back and look at it. So like just some of those things, just making sure you put the finishing touches on those reports so you walk into the draft confident about your opinion, your take, and the grades that you put on these players.
Yeah, I'll say that too. One of the challenges I have is as you talk to more people as you come down the home stretch, you start to get a feel for where guys are going to go. Not necessarily the teams, but this player is going to go ahead of that player. And it's having that knowledge of going, okay, I know this guy's going to go ahead. And then maybe you're going to take some grief for having a different personal order that you have. But we get paid to give our opinions, not to, canvas the league and tell you this is when these guys are going to go. Like that's a different exercise. So it's just being rooted in that, saying, you know what, I'm okay with that. Like I think, Thieneman's going to go ahead of McNeil Warren. I'm a McNeil Warren guy, so I'm going to stick with McNeil Warren. Like those types of things. Like, and we're going to get to some of these other ones here in this episode because I want to tell you and have the conversation dialogue about how it looks like some guys are coming off here down the home stretch and making some big improvements. But it is, Phil Savage, who I'd worked with, used to always talk about the fog of confusion when you get into the spring. There's so much out there that you can lose your way a little bit. You got to keep track of that North Star, man, and stay where you're grounded there.
And I think it's even harder in our position. Like, look, we're fortunate to do what we're able to do, but when you're not with the team, because when we first go out there, you talk about your first top 50, my turf, like you're kind of out there on your own. And then because that's before we even get together with our league buddies and stuff like that, before you're like, okay, yeah. Like we're in the ballpark. But sometimes you can't feel like a lone wolf because you're trying to be first to the party, first to the thing or whatever. But at the end of the day, I stick to what we've always talked about. Hey, man, let's get them in the right neighborhood. Now let's start to put them in the right house and do those things. And sticking to that formula by the end of it. Because the only time you got to be right is by draft day. By the time we get to draft weekend, I feel pretty confident about the things that we've talked about, the players that we've kind of put in position.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way here as we come down the home stretch. I think it's a good exercise to go back, and I keep track as every time I update it. I keep track of that original list, and then I keep track of each iteration. So what I'll do is I'll go back to the original, and I'll say who's traveled the furthest from where I initially had them. And I might revisit some of those players and say, man, I gave that guy too much love. I gave that guy not enough. Inevitably, what happens a lot of times, you talked about the cycle, right? It ends up kind of almost coming back to where you originally had them. And they're at least in that same neighborhood. Guys don't change zip codes. You might change houses, but they don't change zip codes.
No, they don't. And a lot of times your first impression is the best impression. And sometimes we can get so much conversation that it can kind of make us kind of waver a little bit. But I found that we've talked about it. What we generally feel about the player after that first evaluation off tape, more times than not, that ends up being kind of what he is and what we truly feel about the player.
One of the things I wanted to hit you on before we jump into some of this other stuff, talking to a bunch of teams, I've noticed this over the last few years, and I remember this used to go back to New England back during their run, during their heyday. They only had notoriously like 75 to 100 names on their draft board when it was all said and done. Like they narrowed the field, and they were okay taking a guy in the third round that you might have a sixth round. The league might think is a sixth rounder because they knew who they were and what they wanted and what fit for them. So they shrunk their board down. in the teams that I talk to, the more teams that I talk to, I have found there is somewhat of a correlation between the size of your board and how good your team is. Like the good teams, they don't mess with these other dudes, man. They just don't, for the most part. There's a
Yeah.
few exceptions. For the most part, they don't. I can't tell you the number of teams I've talked to. Hey, what'd you end up doing with this guy? Like, nah, we're not even watching him. Like he's off the board. And I was like, well, gosh, is there anything like crazy criminal? And they're like, nah, he's not. We don't like the makeup. We're good. Like, not going to mess with him. I was like, wow, okay.
No, it's funny, right? So we always talk about bringing books into it, and Jim Collins is always one of my favorite authors, and I'm going back and reading Great by Choice. And one of the things it talks about is like the discipline that you have to have in terms of being successful. Like you don't waver, you just have to be disciplined in your approach and really believe in your approach and don't fall prey to what others on the outside do. And when you talk about that part of it, the discipline of knowing, hey man, these are the guys that are for us. And even
Mm-hmm.
though the world, the noise is going to talk about all these other guys, we have to have enough confidence in ourselves and what we're doing that we believe these guys fit us. And we're okay standing 10 toes down on that. I think sometimes when we're team builders or we're scouts or whatever, we can let the outside noise impact us. But DJ, we've been on the road and been like, man, this guy is not for us. I'm writing a
No.
report and I'm giving him a grade, but some of it is just an exercise. We know that he's not really a fit for us, but we go through it because we're scared. Well, if I don't have him, we're wrong, and all the other people will talk about us. But at the end of the day, when you're building your team, you should build it with the guys that you know are good for your team, your culture, your environment, your scheme, all of that. The other guys are just fluff. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, there's a handful of players in this draft where you talk to teams picking in the back half, and they're like, "Oh, please tell me this guy's going to go before we pick." Like, I don't want it. He's not for us. Like, just tell me he's going to be off the board. Like, we're not going to take him, but we prefer him to go ahead of us to at least help somebody else better that we like, fall into our lap. But that's, it is interesting to me. Whereas some of the teams that they're trying to serve too many masters, trying to keep this list of 200 plus guys on there. And you're looking at going, there can't be 200 guys that fit you, man.
Well, and I'm gonna say this because we've all said in those draft rooms, and we've all said when the board has had too many guys, DJ, it's hard to think. I mean,
Yeah.
it really is hard to think about, hey, what I'm doing. It's the equivalent of going to In-N-Out and going to Cheesecake Factory. Cheesecake
Yeah.
Factory menu has so many different things that what am I going to pick? By the time the server comes, you don't know really what you want because you have so many options available to you. I think skinning it out, like really cutting it down, trimming the fat, so you just have a clear picture of the guys that you want. To me, it's just so much of a better process because now let's have conversations about the guys that we want. Let's not waste a lot of time talking about guys that don't fit us, even though we can acknowledge that they're good players and they may be really good players for someone else. They just don't fit what we're trying to build.
Yeah, no doubt. That's going to lead me perfectly into this next thing here because I want to talk about some guys, surprise first rounders. So if we're looking at names that could surprise and end up going in the first round, I'm gonna give you a couple, Buck, and hit me with a couple as well. I did this exercise with Schrager for his pod, and we were kind of going through doing a mock draft every other one, and he had a good one because he's in my top 50, but it wouldn't shock me at all. He had Keylan Rutledge from Georgia Tech sneaking into the bottom of the first round. And he's we talk about red stars. Like he would be my red star player this year. If you ask me who's my favorite guy, that's who I would have as my favorite guy. Like I really like him a lot as a player. And there's some similarities to Logan Mankins when Mankins was coming out, who we both did at
That's a
Fresno
good one.
State. Remember him? Like everybody loved
That
Logan Mankins, but everybody just assumed he was going to go in the second round. But the Patriots ripped that card at the bottom of the first.
That was a big surprise. Logan Mankins was a huge surprise. Rutledge is interesting because DJ, in my notes, I love everything about him. I talk about him being a bully. I talk about how athletic he is, climbing to the next level, how physical he is at the point of attack, how he has set the table for everything that you look for at the line of scrimmage, the point of attack. But we typically don't grade those guys like that. Like we're talking about the
Yeah.
bottom of the first round, we tend to value those guys as top of the second round picks. But the teams that you're talking about that will be down there, there's definitely need. Like when you look at the Patriots in particular, like he'll be a great fit down there. He kind of fits the style of play and what they want to do. Um, there is that thing at the bottom of the first round. A lot of times you're talking about the better teams, and the
Mm-hmm.
better teams have to take the best player that's available there, and they can't deviate because the next time around, DJ, they're really not in that clump of players that they want. So sometimes a guy that would be maybe a mid-second round player can go in the first round for them because they know by the time they pick again in the bottom of the second, he won't be available.
How about Chris Johnson, corner from San Diego State? If he found his way into the bottom of the first round, wouldn't shock me.
No, it wouldn't shock me either. And I think the thing that really did it for him was the combine. And I want people to understand in this context, the biggest question that you had about Chris Johnson on tape was the recovery speed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how fast was he? When you watched him, I made a comparison to Tre'Davious White. When you watched him play, he was solid in so many different areas, but there were a couple occasions where you're like, man, I wonder if he has enough long speed to kind of hold up on the perimeter. And when he runs the time, we're like, well, the time's not there. Maybe it's something we can teach technique wise. But I believe when you're uncertain about the rest of the guys, to me, he's the easiest one to say, hey, I know he's going to be a good player. I'm going to take him. Is he a number one? I don't know, but I know he's a number two all day, and I'm good with that.
Yeah, I mean, that was the whole thing, was the recovery speed. And then he rips off a 4.4 flat in Indy. And you're like, okay, well, I mean, there still are some concerns when you watch it on tape. There's still times where you see him, put in a compromising position, but he's so sturdy and strong and tough, plays the ball. And then now the card looks a lot better. It looks a lot better on the wall than it did when you've got that time on there. So he's another one I could sneaking in there. Any ones that come out to you, Buck, top of the head that surprise
Well,
you?
well, just going by mock drafts and recent conversations, Jadarian Price from Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Like people have him slotted at the bottom of the first round. And then the running back position is really interesting, right? So you have Jeremiah Love at the top, and then you have a clump of players. And some would say that, hey, Jadarian Price is the only other tier one player. Others would say that Emmett Johnson deserves to be in the conversation as a guy that could potentially be a starter. But where do you take him? When you have the conversation over Price, you talk about big, fast, and physical. You talk about the way that he looks. He's dynamic in the return game. He can go downhill. He can catch the ball out the backfield, even though the production doesn't suggest that. There's a lot to like. I wrote down in my notes. I have like A minus B plus. I have look. This dude is right at the bottom fringes, bottom of first, top of second. I can see him going in the bottom of the first round, and it would be funny because we haven't really talked about the RB class being one that there should be 2 first round talents in it.
Yeah. No, I think to me, he's clearly the second guy, and where do I have? He's my 39th player. So not a huge stretch at all for me, just how I have him rated if he were to sneak in there into the bottom of one. Trying to think of some other guys. Jacob Rodriguez, if he ended up, that would kind of shock the world, where I think started out as he's a third round player, and then now I'd say he's pretty solidly in the second round. But somebody could fall in love with him. He's got the production, he had the workout to go along with it, the makeup, all that stuff's elite. He's in my 40s, I believe, on my overall list. I'll give you he is number 41. So again, when you're talking about somebody, if you're in the top 50, for me, like there's all bets are off. Like you're a candidate to go in the first round.
Yeah, it's funny because we'll stick to the same thing in terms of flavors and linebackers and those things. Jacob Rodriguez definitely is there. DJ, but when you thought he wasn't going to be a fast player, you wrote in your notes about how instinctive his
Yeah.
instincts and awareness allow him to play faster than his speed or whatever. Well, then he pops the time you're like, oh, well, maybe he is legitimately there. And then when you think about the other linebackers that he would be competing against, you talk about CJ Allen and Anthony Hill. You can certainly make a case about Jacob Rodriguez on tape being a guy that is dynamic and explosive. Let's talk about Anthony Hill, though, because I've seen the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
heard the conversation about Anthony Hill being in that vein. 17 career sacks for an inside linebacker is kind of crazy when we talk about it. Like track background, he was on a 4x4 relay in high school. He's active. He makes splash plays. He has instincts. He can hit, run, and cover. When we're talking about the teams that are looking for linebackers, it has been assumed that CJ Allen would be the first. But I don't know. He's a little more traditional, old school. If they're looking for something different, you can see those other guys being in play at those spots.
Yeah. No, I think those conversations start happening there, and it can get kind of interesting. I'm looking for guys that are then, not in my top 50. And usually, look, it happens. There's guys who I don't have in the top 50, and you might get one every now and then that pops in there and sneaks into the first round. Going back through this list of guys, Pregnon would be one, maybe. There's some teams really
Yeah,
like Emmanuel Pregnon could sneak in
yeah,
there.
the guard from Oregon.
hmm Jake Golday, I like a lot, but
Yeah, he's
just
athletic.
outside. Yeah, just
Yeah,
outside my top 50, but I think that's
but he has size. I mean, he is kind of like that. People talk about Leighton Vander Esch, but you remember how big Leighton Vander Esch is? Different
yeah.
game. But this guy having experience early, having his hand in the dirt, playing on the edges, then playing linebacker. He does a bunch of different things. When I look at him, I'm like, man, he kind of strikes me as a classic Pittsburgh Steeler type,
hmm
like heavy-handed or whatever. But no, he's another good one. And when you look at his testing numbers were really impressive in terms of the way that he moved around and did the shuttles and all that.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, well, there's some candidates there, some sneaky first round picks we could see happening there on night one of the draft. Let's take a break, come back. I've got a couple questions for you. Get to those right after this. All right, Buck, as we are here inside 3 weeks, hit you on some of these that I think is where the trending, we'll call this a little trending segment here, where things are trending. I'll start with the first one here. I think Jermod McCoy is trending to be the first corner pick. I have Mansour Delane higher, but I've always stated that the 24 tape for McCoy is even better than the 25 tape. Then you add the traits. He does have the traits that that Delane doesn't possess. And then the fact that McCoy looks so good in his workout and ran well. Not only that, just he looked great, man. And so you're like, okay, if this guy's back to full health now, we can now feel a little more comfortable off our 24 evaluation. And he has more of the prototypical size. So I think that's trending towards him being the first corner off the board.
Well, the biggest thing that was holding him back, and the reason why I would say that Monsieur Delane kind of jumped over top of him is because we had seen him work, we saw him play. With McCoy, we were getting to the point where is he going to work out? You talk about someone that we haven't seen in a year, then he's not going to work out. There's no way we can take him as the first one. But now that he's worked out, you're more confident that he's going to be okay when we get ready to play. And the tape going back to 2024 was really, really good. He can play off. He's feisty. He's aggressive. He has instincts and awareness. Then I discovered during the interview that he has a baseball background, which adds another notch to him. Funny thing, Colton Hood was also a baseball player. Colton Hood brought up in the interview when we interviewed him on Friday on Path, hey, I'm a better baseball player than McCoy. Like he knows. He was like, check his stats. Tell him to check his stats. And so I love that we talk about multi-sport players, but no, McCoy having that in his background, he's just a really good player, good ball skills. I definitely can see why he would go ahead of Mansour Delane now that we have him worked out and verified in those things.
Yeah, similar weight, almost I think within a pound of each other, same 40 time, but he's an inch taller and he's a little longer. So that's that's where I could see that kind of trending in that direction. Some other stuff here that as we're going through it, I think is trending that way. I don't see Bain going in the top 5, Buck. Even to me at Bain, I have Bain. I think the conversation is more starting with 8, 9, 10. I think that's his neighborhood. If I was going to peg it, I think Bain falls somewhere in there.
I think there's a settle. And in fact, DJ, I am beginning in my own thing because I really like the way that he played in the college football playoff. And I love what he brings to the table. But I am still concerned about the measure. Like I am worried about when we talk about the expectations that come along with taking someone in the top 10. You talk about him not being surprised in the top 5, seeing him like 8, 9, or 10. I wouldn't be surprised that at the end of it, it comes down that he is, I don't know, anywhere from like 12 with the Cowboys to 17 with the Detroit Lions. I could see him maybe falling out like that when people kind of get to it and have to make decisions on who they really believe in and buy into as a guy that's going to be an impact player at the top.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see where his landing spot ultimately ends up. A couple other ones here as we're going through it. Proctor, I think, has got some heat coming down the home stretch here. Yeah. Who, to me, was just, I don't know, I just got cold feet with the weight when you have weight that was up where his was, and he cut it down to if you guarantee him he's going to be in the 350s, he's a top 10 pick in this draft. But I think he goes between 10 and 20. I don't think he falls out of the top 20 in this draft. Caleb Proctor, the big tackle out of Alabama.
Look, talking to Duke Manyweather, who is working with Proctor, he just talked about the weight being very impactful in terms of how he played when he was heavy early. Because the first thing that stood out, DJ, I watched the Florida State game right out the gate, and I was like, ugh, this was
Yeah,
bad.
it was bad.
And
by the way, it's Caden. I don't know why I call him Caleb. I've got Caleb Lomu and Caden Proctor on my brain here. But yeah, Caden Proctor.
And so it was bad against Florida State, but then you talk to him and you find out he lost 25 to 35 pounds in season, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
The red flag that brings up is, well, why was he so heavy to begin with? Like, can he control it? Will he be able to manage it over the course of the season? The good part that comes out of it is there's a direct correlation with his weight management and the productivity and performance on the field. If you get him in shape and make sure he's there, there's no doubt about the talent and the athleticism that he brings. It's just about the discipline that he'll have to have when it comes to managing his weight.
Yeah, no, it's that's something you got to take into consideration there. We'll see where he ends up coming off the board. Let's get you one more here. I've gone back and forth on this one between the Jets at number 2 with Reese and Bailey and Reese. I started out, I think I went Bailey at least once, if not twice, and then flipped it to Reese because I was looking, and that's not off any information, but just it looks like this is a team that's pointed more towards 27 than 26. But as we're kind of within a couple weeks now, everything that I'm getting from talking to folks around the league who have not talking to people with the Jets, but people who are tight with folks from the Jets, it feels to me more like they want Bailey as just the more polished pass rusher and a little more certainty there versus the upside of Reese. So I've been leaning more towards Bailey as we're coming down the home stretch here over Reese with the second pick.
It's funny, right? Because one of the prominent beat reporters for the Jets, Rich Cimini, talked about Arvell Reese being more the pick than that. So
yeah. It's interesting what you hear this time of year.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And I will say this, if you go back and look at the past, Aaron Glenn comes from Detroit. Detroit had to make a pick. Well, they didn't really have the choice.
The choice got made for them.
Yeah, Trayvon Walker, Aiden Hutchinson. But you think about what Aiden Hutchinson did in terms of the anchor. And it's a very similar conversation. Trayvon Walker was more of a projection. Aiden Hutchinson, you kind of knew what you're getting. Well, if you're Aaron Glenn and you lean into that, hey, let's go with what we know. With David Bailey's your choice because you've seen him play edge extensively and exclusively throughout his time. You don't have that same feel for Arvell Reese. So you're guessing on what he could be as opposed to being able to look at a player and say, no, this is what he is and this is how we're going to plug him in. You may be right. And if I'm Aaron Glenn, and I've had coaches tell me this, and this goes all the way back to the Isaiah Simmons thing. Scouts love the versatility and stuff. Coaches sometimes are like, yeah, but it's hard because what room does he go in? Does he go to the linebacker room for Endo, or does he go to the edge rusher room? And how does he see himself? Does he see himself as an edge rusher, but we're saying, oh, no, you're a linebacker? All of that matters in terms of the player fully maximizing himself. So sometimes it's easy just to be like, yeah, David Bailey, he's a pass rusher. Let's put him in that room and let's get him better.
Yeah, no, and he can already do it. He does it at a very high level. So those are a couple of little nugs there as we're coming down the home stretch again. No guarantee all this information ends up being spot on, but it is kind of the chatter that you get from talking to folks around the industry. So inside the draft room. So it'll be interesting to see how this thing shakes up. Buck, anything else you want to throw in there before we get out of here?
No, it's so funny. Just that last little conversation, how people can put us on detours on the path. David Bailey and Arvell Reese. There's so many other guys that we'll debate. We talked about Jermod McCoy and Mansur Lane. At Delane, as we get closer to the draft, is lion season in a major way. And that makes it just even cloudier. So I think you said Phil Savage, fog of confusion.
Yeah.
We're definitely in the middle of it. I may have to put the phone down. I may have to put the phone away for a little
bit. Yeah, no, it's the biggest thing is not just having an impact on your rankings. I just remember the only one time I can remember it where it was, this is going way back when, but it was maybe the week of the draft. It was before my last list came out. And I was talking to somebody and they said, I think they even told me the team that like, hey, Detroit's going to take Frank Ragnow in the first round. I was like, Frank Ragnow's going in the first round? Are you kidding me? Like I had done him so long ago and just put him to bed. And I'm like, you know what? If a team with the resources, an NFL team, all those resources, views this guy as a first round pick, I at least owe it to the process to go back and do more work on them. So I went back and did more work on him, and I was like, God, this guy's a lot better than I ended up thinking he was. I've done this guy so long ago. So it was late in the process, and I didn't put him up in making my 15th player or anything like that, but I introduced him into my top 50 towards the end. And it was just like, hey, like as they say, right, sometimes you just got to raise your hand, say, hey, that one's on me. Got that one wrong. But I was glad I got the heads up beforehand so I can go back and revisit it.
Yeah, no, it happens. And sometimes, you know how it is, DJ, like lists to go up and you'll get a phone call from somebody like, hey, man, I don't want to say this, but like, you might be a little like, have you gone back and check this game? And so there are some of those conversations that happen, but ultimately, man, you have to trust in what you believe in, trust your evaluation, and we'll figure it out in 3 years if it's a hit or miss.
Yeah, that's the way it works, man. So anyways, well, we're getting there. We're almost there. We appreciate you guys hanging with us today. We'll see you next time right here on Move the Sticks.